What's up, Buttercups? Welcome to another video. Today I'm going to be talking about how beer is made. This isn't a recipe, this isn't a how-to home brew. This is just an outline of the basic process of brewing so that you can get a better understanding of what goes into making beer. And there are over 100 different beer styles, so there's over 100 different variations on this process, but this is just like the bare bones, what goes into it. The four basic ingredients when making beer are water, malt, hops, and yeast. Let's get started with water. Water makes up more than 90% of what's in your bottle, so it's the unsung hero of beer. And the particular kind of water used has a big impact on how the final brew turns out. Because brewing beer is mostly chemistry with an added bonus of physics, the chemical composition of the water is the foundation for everything else that goes into it. Some brewers have a consistent enough water source that they use, but many will treat their water to get the chemical composition and present minerals just right for their beer. So while everyone else focuses on malt or geeks out over hops, remember to praise that water like it's holy, y'all. Next ingredient on the list is malt. And this is not the same malt as those segregated malt shops from the 50s where white teenagers would share a milkshake on a date. 2 straws, please. When you hear malt mentioned in reference to beer, it's almost exclusively malted barley grains. The barley is harvested and then dampened and sprouted, just like if you were trying to get a little seedling started. Then the maltster, aka one who malts, takes the sprouted grain and roasts it in a kiln. The longer the roast, the darker the grain, and the darker the grain, the darker the beer. This is known as the malting process, and without it, the barley is just a grain and not a malt. Other grains can be malted and used in beer like wheat or rye, but when that's the case, it's usually called malted wheat or malted rye, not just malt. Got it? Great. Moving on. Now on to America's favorite beer ingredient, hops. Hops are shaped like little green pine cones, and they serve a couple different purposes in beer. They are most noted for their flavor, and different varieties grown in different locations do have different flavors. You could take one variety and grow it in Washington and grow the same variety in Germany, and there would be a noticeable difference. How noticeable is this difference? I don't know, but my studies tell me it is noticeable. So, anyway. The flavor most associated with hops is bitterness, but they can also add earthiness, fruitiness, lots of nisses, I guess. And the really cool feature about hops is they also act as a natural preservative in beer. So hops plus alcohol content equals beer's shelf life. Yay! Okay, yeast. It's important because it gives us the alcohol content and carbonation of our beer and essentially ties a nice little flavor ribbon on the whole shebang. But here's where you get some controversy because there are people who are like, well, technically yeast isn't an ingredient. It's just part of the brewing process and gets filtered out before packaging, so it doesn't count as an ingredient. And you know what? Fuck you. You think you're so profound for making that observation? First of all, not all beers filter out the yeast. Plenty of beer styles and tradition leave yeast as a bit of sediment in the bottom of the bottle. Second of all, my girl Merriam-Webster defines an ingredient as something that enters into a compound or is a component of any combination or mixture. And even if it does get filtered out, the resulting flavors and esters and alcohols and CO2 are still present in the fucking beer. Yeast is an ingredient, okay? Rant over. Hey, Emily, I have all these fancy ingredients. How do I do the thing? How do I make them into fizzy bread water? Well, boys and girls and non-binary individuals, I'm happy to help. As it is, I am not a brewer, not even a home brewer, just an enthusiast. Nonetheless, I have come up with a very clever, if inaccurate, visual representation to help you understand the process. So we start off with water that is hot but not boiling. And then we add our malt. As it soaks in the hot water, the starches from the malt are converted into fermentable sugars. And remember that because it'll be important later. Once it has steeped for long enough, The grain husks are filtered out and we'll be left with a liquid that is called wort. It's spelled W-O-R-T, but it's pronounced wort like dirt. The wort is transferred to a kettle so we can move on to our next step, the boil. During the boil, hops are added in 3 different stages. The first batch of hops is added right at the beginning of the boil. Because they are boiling for so long, they only contribute bitterness because all of the flavor and aroma is just killed off by the heat. I would be bitter too if you left me in a hot pot of boiling water. The second batch of hops is added about a half an hour before the end of the boil, and these contribute flavor because they aren't boiled for as long. The third and final batch of hops is added promptly before the end of the boil, and these contribute essential oils which add to aroma that are killed off in the batches that are added earlier within the boil. The hop particles are then filtered out and our wort is transferred into a fermentation vessel where we can add that ever-important ingredient, yeast. Those fermentable sugars we mentioned earlier, here's where they come into play. You see, the yeast eats the fermentable sugars and farts out carbon dioxide and alcohol. Now, the yeast's job is a lengthy process. It can take anywhere from a few weeks to a few months, depending on the style of beer that's being made. So for now, it's just a waiting game. Then, when it's ready, the yeast may or may not be filtered out, and the beer is packaged and ready for your consumption. And that's that on that. Cheers. All right, everyone, thanks for watching. I hope that answered a few questions for you, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.